evacuation efforts in the Northwest Territories. Let's listen in.
And evacuations being ordered for West Kelowna and parts of Kelowna. These fires are very active and very unpredictable. Residents in the area should remain vigilant. You can register for updates from the Central Okanagan Emergency Operations Center on their website. And while we do not yet know the full extent of the damage, I've been in touch with Minister Ma to offer further federal assistance if required. And also last weekend, I received and quickly approved a request for federal assistance from the government of the Northwest Territories. Through this request, the Canadian Armed Forces are providing personnel and resources to assist with Type 3 firefighting, airlift resources for the movement of people and equipment, and support with evacuation planning and coordination. The federal government is also delivering funding to eligible First Nations through the Indigenous Services Canada's Emergency Management Assistance Program. The Canadian Coast Guard is providing personnel and equipment to assist with firefighting. Public Services and Procurement Canada is supporting the territory with emergency contracting, and the RCMP is on the ground helping with evacuation efforts. And the Public Health Agency of Canada is providing essential supplies through the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile. Now, several other federal departments and agencies, including the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre, are supporting efforts in the Northwest Territories through this request for federal assistance or on their own mandates. And just yesterday, the Prime Minister convened a meeting of the Incident Response Group. By bringing ministers and senior officials together, we are can aid in
Minister Sajjan, your connection is not good right now. We can't hear you.
Leaving your home. Sorry, can you hear me?
Now we can, but the connection lag a little bit, so we can hear you in past 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Is that good?
Yes, we can hear you now, yes.
Okay. Yesterday, the Prime Minister convened a meeting of the Incident Response Group. By bringing ministers and senior officials together, we are making sure that we are using every tool we can to aid in this response. I'm also in close contact with my counterpart from the Northwest Territories, Minister Thompson, and have offered any additional support that they might need. The stress of leaving your home, not knowing if it will be there when you return, is a reality now faced by thousands. It is during these dark times that we see our country come together. I've spoken with Minister Ellis in Alberta and Minister Ma in British Columbia to thank them for their support and what they're providing for the Northwest Territories. I would also like to recognize all of the host communities that have been welcoming those displaced by wildfires. And residents of the Northwest Territories and evacuees can call 811 in the territory and 1-844-259-1793 out of territory if they have questions about the evacuations. To the firefighters, members of the Canadian Armed Forces, emergency management officials, and community volunteers who have been working around the clock, we are grateful for your service. And to those being evacuated, know that the Government of Canada is here for you. We are working closely with our provincial and territorial partners to help with immediate response, and we'll be there through the recovery and rebuild process. Please continue to follow the guidance from your local authorities. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. And now I will turn it over to Minister Blair.
Well, thank you very much, Minister Sajjan. Bon après-midi, tout le monde. Let me begin by, first of all, I'm speaking to you from my home, which is located in the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, and the Wendat peoples. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging how difficult this period of time has been for all of those who have been affected by these unprecedented wildfires occurring currently in the Northwest Territories, British Columbia, and across Canada. Our top priority is to keep people safe, and the federal government is here to support you. We will do whatever it takes to ensure that you can return to your communities and livelihoods as quickly as possible. And today, I will have the opportunity to provide an update on the military's contribution to the evacuations and firefighting efforts in the Northwest Territories, where half of the population has now been displaced. On Wednesday evening, territorial authorities advised all residents of Yellowknife to evacuate the city by noon today due to the threat of a large fire just west of the city. This order affects all 22,000 residents of the capital city. which of course is over 40% of the population of the entire Northwest Territory. This evacuation also includes the First Nations communities of N.W.T and Dilo, which are under threat from the rapidly moving fire. All residents are currently advised to evacuate by air or by car towards Alberta, where they will find support and accommodations in Valley View, Fox Creek, and Red Deer. We know that conditions remain very difficult, and I would urge all residents to please follow the advice from local authorities so that we can ensure that you can remain safe as you evacuate. Now, with respect to the Canadian Armed Forces, since Saturday, Canadian Armed Forces members have been helping the territory's first responders with evacuation and firefighting efforts. Following a request for assistance from the Government of Northwest Territories, a CAF reconnaissance team deployed to Yellowknife on the weekend, and they were followed very quickly by approximately 150 Canadian Armed Forces members who were then deployed to the region. And that includes 120 soldiers from the 2nd Canadian Divisions out of Canadian Force Base Valcartier and 30 aviators. On Monday, the Royal Canadian Air Force evacuated approximately 100 people from Hay River and Fort Smith. Canadian Armed Forces members are currently out working the fires. They're mopping up and clearing debris as fires are put out. They're dousing hotspots to prevent further outbreaks. And very importantly, they have been working with local officials to construct fire breaks in and around the western region of Yellowknife and N.W.T to stop the spread and to protect critical infrastructure, homes, and that in community. Canadian Armed Forces members are also providing aircraft for mobility and logistics tasks, and of course for air evacuations. Hercules, Globemaster, and Polaris aircraft are currently tasked to conduct evacuation flights to Edmonton and Calgary. And today I can confirm that the first military evacuation flight from Yellowknife took place last night on board a C-130 Hercules aircraft, which safely carried 79 long-term care residents to Edmonton. This is an important contribution that the Canadian Armed Forces can make because they have fit-for-purpose aircraft that are able to move people who may be non-ambulatory, on stretcher, or in wheelchair. And they can also provide medical personnel to provide support and assistance to those who may need it. Additionally, military aircraft are scheduled for today. We'll continue to focus on helping the most vulnerable, and we'll be there to help for as long as it takes. I'm advised, for example, that we're working with local medical officials in order to safely evacuate people from hospital to a hospital in Vancouver. And again, Canadian aircraft, Canadian Armed Forces aircraft, and Canadian medical personnel will be there to ensure that that can be done safely. The Canadian Armed Forces is also providing planning assistance and logistical support to territorial authorities and local firefighting crews. And for example, members of the Canadian Rangers are receiving and processing evacuees at the Yellowknife Airport. I'd like to take this opportunity, if I may, to thank all members of the Canadian Armed Forces who have been working around the clock to help fight these fires in Northwest Territories and have put in an extraordinary service to Canada and to Canadians throughout this long and difficult firefighting season. Our country is experiencing the worst forest fire season on record. And this summer, Canadian Armed Forces members have deployed across the country. They've worked in Nova Scotia, in Quebec, in Alberta, British Columbia, and now the Northwest Territories. And they will continue to be there for Canada and for Canadians. Let me conclude by saying to all Canadians, we'll do everything we can to keep you and your loved ones' livelihoods and communities safe and secure. We'll be with you there throughout this evacuation, and we'll continue to support you through the very difficult and challenging times. I want to acknowledge how difficult and traumatic it can be for people to leave their homes and leave their communities with the uncertainty and fear that all of that would entail. I want to assure them the RCMP will be in your community to make sure that the evacuation is orderly and that your homes and your community remain safe. We've made exemptions, for example, to allow people to transport their pets because we know how difficult it can be for people to leave them. We will also be there when you arrive at an evacuation center to ensure that you receive the support and the assistance that you may require. There's a long road ahead, but I want to assure you all, we will stand by you in this time of need. And I now turn it over to my colleague and friend, Minister Rodriguez.
Merci beaucoup.
Interpretation will not be provided for the current speaker because an appropriate microphone is not being used. Interpretation will resume as soon as an appropriate microphone is used.
Tout ce qui est possible pour aider, pour assurer la sécurité du monde, ça c'est notre priorité numéro 1. La fin de semaine dernière, quand mon collègue, le ministre Sajjan, a reçu une demande d'assistance, il n'a pas perdu une seconde, il a approuvé immédiatement. On a envoyé du personnel pour lutter contre les feux de forêt. On a du monde des Forces armées canadiennes, mais aussi de la GRC sur le terrain. On donne du support logistique. On a envoyé des avions, des hélicoptères. La garde côtière est présente. Il y a aussi du soutien financier pour appuyer les Premières Nations à déployer des mesures d'urgence. Et du côté des services publics et approvisionnement Canada, on aide les territoires du Nord-Ouest avec la mécanique pour les contrats d'urgence. Donc, on est là à tout point de vue. Et le gouvernement est là pour combattre les feux de forêt, pour aider l'évacuation de la population. Et hier, mes collègues l'ont mentionné, le premier ministre a convoqué le groupe d'intervention à cas d'incident. Il a été très clair. Le mot d'ordre est clair. Travailler ensemble pour sortir le monde de là. On veut sortir tout le monde de là, combattre les feux de forêt. Et de mon côté, j'ai personnellement parlé avec le président d'Air Canada, de Canadian North, des différentes compagnies, m'ont assuré de leur collaboration. Ils ont augmenté le nombre de vols pour aider à évacuer la population. Par exemple, Air Canada a ajouté 2 vols hier, elle ajoute d'autres aujourd'hui. D'autres compagnies aériennes ont augmenté le nombre de vols. Et Transport Canada est en contact direct avec plusieurs autres compagnies pour s'assurer qu'il y a une capacité supplémentaire tout au cours de l'évacuation. Et de plus, et ceci est très important, Air Canada m'assure qu'ils ont plafonné le prix de tous les vols sans escale qui partent de Yellowknife. Vous avez déjà entendu parler de cette situation, de la possibilité d'une augmentation de prix. J'ai tout de suite pris le téléphone, j'ai appelé le DG d'Air Canada et j'ai parlé aux autres compagnies. Et le message a été très clair. Il n'y a aucune forme d'exploitation de prix qui allait être acceptée ou tolérée par le gouvernement du Canada. Alors, Transport a reçu plusieurs requêtes pour faciliter l'évacuation. Vous le savez, on ne fait pas ça dans des conditions normales. Transport a dit oui à chacune de ces requêtes. Par exemple, on permet aux pilotes de prolonger leurs heures de vol sans compromettre la sécurité à aucun moment. On permet aux personnes qui ont des animaux domestiques de les amener avec eux en toute sécurité. Vous savez, ça devient souvent un membre de la famille. On est moins strict également avec des personnes qui auraient pu, dans la course effrénée en sortant de leur maison, qui auraient pu oublier leur pièce d'identité. On est beaucoup moins strict. L'important, c'est qu'on puisse évacuer tout le monde en toute sécurité. Et si vous me permettez, j'aimerais remercier en fait l'ensemble des personnes qui travaillent avec acharnement dans une situation qui est extrêmement difficile. Je veux particulièrement remercier les travailleurs du secteur de l'aviation pour s'assurer, pour tout le travail qu'ils font pour s'assurer que la population des territoires du Nord-Ouest se rende à un endroit sécuritaire le plus rapidement possible. On fait la consultation de près, l'équipe est en contact avec le terrain de base permanente et si quoi que ce soit on va le faire. So, I want to make sure that everyone understands that yesterday I spoke with the CEO of Air Canada, I spoke also with Canadian North. They increased the numbers of flights to help evacuate the population. For example, Air Canada added 2 flights yesterday. They're adding more flights today. Other airlines have also added more flights in recent days. And many airlines have stepped up to add more flights. And we've been talking to other airlines to ensure that have that extra capacity, those extra seats during vacation. And you know, heard yesterday for concern about their side. I heard that. I took the phone and called the CEO of Air Canada and other companies. Air Canada assured me they had all prices, non-stop flights out of United. And I was clear with them that any form of price dodging during an emergency is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. We also read many requests from local authorities. For example, and we write all of them. For example, we allowed pilots to extend their flight hours so they continue health evacuation, all of that, and all safety. We're allowing residents to bring their pets with them on board of the flights. They're quite often members of the family. We're more flexible with people that might have left the ID behind. A lot of people ran out of the house, they left documents behind, be more flexible. The important things is to evacuate them, evacuate everyone in our security. In fact, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to all the air sector workers for the work of the past few years. And I know you guys, each and every one, are working hard to ensure residents of the Northwest Territories can get to safety, and for that, we're so thankful. And we keep monitoring the situation all the time on a permanent basis, and if there's anything else we can do, we will do it. Now I'll bring to my colleague, Mr.
Thank you, Pablo. Hello, everyone. I'm currently joining you from the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Thank you for being here to help us get this information out to Canadians that need it. I'm going to be focusing my comments on the work to deliver services and benefits to Canadians, the benefits that they need and require to get through this difficult time. Now, Service Canada is particularly well equipped to respond to the current wildfire situation in the territories as well as in the Okanagan and across Canada. We have national and regional emergency operations centers that are actively providing support to affected Canadians. Of the 5 centers we have in the Northwest Territory, Fort Smith, Hay River, and Yellowknife are closed, but Service Canada has also deployed mobile outreach units to evacuation centers. This is true in Fort Simpson as well as in Northern Alberta, and we are assessing the need for further sites as well. This will allow those who may need to apply for benefits such as employment insurance to be able to do so right away. If wildfires has caused you to lose your job, I would suggest that you please submit your application for EI benefits right away. Your application will be prioritized based on your postal code, and you will not need a record of employment. Please also consider signing up for direct deposit. If you're still receiving paper checks for employment insurance, your pension, OAS, this will ensure payments will be made directly into your bank account. We are also proactively reaching out to individuals who are still receiving paper checks, and we're also facilitating replacement payments for benefit checks that may have been left behind or which may be currently in the mail. Workers are encouraged to create or access their My Service Canada accounts in order to access these services immediately. If you're unable to access regular services online or in person, or if you have any trouble at all, Service Canada employees are here to help. The toll-free number is 1-877-631-2657. I'll say that again. The number for Service Canada is 1-877-631-2657. The Outreach Center is open Monday to Friday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. If you call outside of these hours, please leave a message. With your information. You will receive a call back on the next business day, and your situation will be prioritized. Service Canada is ready to help everyone affected by the wildfires, and our experienced service officers can help you access the benefits you need to navigate this extraordinary set of circumstances and the challenges that our families and our neighbors are facing. You are not alone. There is no need to hesitate to reach out to Service Canada. Our entire organization stands at the ready to assist every single person that is affected by the wildfires. Thank you. And I believe I'm passing the floor to my colleague, Julie DeBruza.
Thank you, Minister Beach, and good afternoon. I'm joining you from Toronto, which is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewas, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and it continues to be home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. Toronto is also covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. So today, I'm joining you in my capacity as the Parliamentary Secretary to both the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, Minister Wilkinson, and to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Minister Guilbeault. As fires rage across our country, like the ones in the Northwest Territories and in Kelowna, we see the impacts of climate change. This government is fighting climate change to slow the pace and impacts of these fires in the future. And we are making sure communities have the support they need to respond to these disasters and to keep people safe right now. Ressources Naturelles Canada joue un rôle clé dans l'effort de réponse immédiate et directe aux catastrophes que nous voyons actuellement. Par exemple, le ministre Wilkinson a récemment accordé des fonds à 6 provinces et
recently provided financing or approved financing to different provinces and territories, including Northwest Territories, to help with the firefighting effort.
Minister Wilkinson also announced last week that we're partnering with the International Association of Firefighters to train more structural firefighters, equipping them with skills needed to help identify and suppress fires in the critically important wildland-urban interface. I'm here today to provide an update on Natural Resource Canada's support to the Northwest Territories. Through a recently signed 5-year agreement with the territorial government, this government is providing over $13 million to help the government of Northwest Territories to buy wildland firefighting equipment and train and hire essential personnel. Under this agreement, we are providing federal funding for 3 specific priority areas. The first is specialized wildfire equipment, like aircraft, vehicles, dispatch consoles, and dust suppressants. The second is external services, such as helicopters, seasonal detection aircraft, and an aircraft skimmer group. The third is specialized training for things like air attack officers and loaders and critical staffing in roles such as wildfire planning, preparedness, mitigation, and response. This funding is flowing to the Northwest Territories right now. Et nous continuons à travailler avec eux.
We also continue to work with provinces and territories, as well as all other partners, to help them face challenges of the future.
And safer planet for the long term. And we will continue to do everything we can to keep people and families, including those in the Northwest Territories, safe in the immediate term. This is our greatest responsibility and highest priority. And I wanted to mention that I've been in touch with our MP for the area, Northwest Territories, Michael McLeod, who I know has been working very hard and is in constant communication with all of us in how we can best respond. So together, we will get through this. Thank you, merci, and I will now pass it back to my colleague, Minister Sajjan.
Unless we can hear from Minister Sajjan, I think we can, I'm talking to the people coordinating, they may be able to go to questions.
Yes, I think that makes sense. Thank you, ministers. Merci. Let's head to our questions. Again, a few reminders. One question, one follow-up. En question, une supplémentaire, s'il vous plaît. I remind.
One question, one follow-up, please.
This is to minimize outside noise and use the raise hand function to seek a question. So premièrement, first up, I'd like to turn to Christy Kirkup, Globe and Mail.
Hello, can you hear me?
Very well, thanks.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I think my question would probably best be suited for Minister Blair. I know today you highlighted some of the efforts around the evacuation of people at the hospital in Yellowknife, and I'm just wondering perhaps why that process didn't happen sooner. And the reason I'm kind of mentioning as a point of context is that in the situation in Fort McMurray, the hospital was evacuated days before the citywide order came down, and that did not take place in Yellowknife. So can you just provide some context about why the evacuation of the hospital did not happen sooner?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the question, Christy. Certainly, we've been working very closely with local officials in the Northwest Territory government, the medical officials at the hospital there, to make sure that evacuation could be done safely. It's also important to acknowledge and recognize that the highway leading south from Yellowknife remains open, and that is an important point of egress from the community and evacuation from the city for now. But the logistics of moving the people from the hospital, we had to make sure that we had the right equipment, but also the right personnel so that it could be done safely. And that's what the logistics of that have been worked out. I would also point out that from the outset, the officials in the Northwest Territory, working very closely with their federal counterparts and even some of our provincial partners, have organized this as a very methodical, staged and careful evacuation. The situation in Fort McMurray that you referred to was one of a more rapidly evolving nature and a greater sense of urgency associated to that. The fires that are encroaching upon Yellowknife, there's still ongoing efforts to slow the encroachment and the advance of those fires into the community. But I think officials quite appropriately have been working very carefully to ensure that there was a methodical, staged, and appropriately timed evacuation of people from the community. We have now reached the stage where we believe it's appropriate, necessary, and we have all of the resources that will be required to facilitate the movement of people from the hospital. We've also made arrangements with the province of British Columbia to move those people to adequate facilities to continue to support and provide them with care and services in the city of Vancouver. And so all of that work has been ongoing. And I believe the timing and the methodical way in which this has been approached has been quite appropriate.
Thank you, Minister. And just as a point of follow-up, I think perhaps this question will again be directed at you, but I'm wondering if perhaps you can kind of speak to the dynamics in the Emergency Operations Center. Obviously, you have the Northwest Territory involved, the city, the federal government, the military, Alberta Emergency Services. And I'm wondering if in moments like this, there's a challenge in terms of essentially having a clear authority who's running the show. Is that a challenge when you have so many different levels of government coming together to respond to an emergency like this?
Well, and Chris, it's a great question, but I want to take the opportunity to assure Canadians. First of all, I've spent enough time myself in emergency operations centers. I've watched the way in which people come together and coordinate. There is very little overlap or conflict among officials. Everybody knows their job, and they're doing it exceptionally well. The lead, as always, is with the province or territory and local officials. But at the same time, we recognize capacity and certainly the unprecedented nature of these fires. The evacuation of their capital city, very, very significantly challenging as it would be for anybody. And so our officials, both in the Canadian Armed Forces, in Public Safety Canada, in emergency preparedness, and Mr. Sajan's personnel, our Government Operations Center, very seamlessly coordinate and come together. Everybody knows their job, and they bring all of the resources, and there's an incredible atmosphere of collaboration. I also wanted to point out at the very outset of this, other jurisdictions, provinces that have experienced similar challenges, and even today are continuing to experience challenges, reached out almost immediately. I heard from, for example, Minister Mike Ellis, the Public Safety Minister in Alberta, who called saying that they had an awful lot of experience, as you know, earlier this season with wildfires and evacuations and the movement of people and accommodating people in shelter. And he offered their expertise, their help, and was right there. Similarly, in British Columbia, Minister Bowen Ma has also reached out. They're facing enormous challenges down in Kelowna right now, but they still answered the call. And this is, as I said, an all hands on deck. There is very little overlap or confusion that takes place in this. People know their jobs. They all come together to do their jobs. They're all working out with a single purpose, and that's to keep people safe and to do their jobs and to stop these fires advancing into the community, to protect those communities and homes, but mostly to get people to safety and make sure that they get the supports that they need.
Thank you, Christy. Minister. Ensuite, je vais tourner à Mathis Harvey.
Now let's go to Mathis Harvey from Radio-Canada.
Oui, bonjour, merci pour...
Question. Thank you. I don't know who would be best placed to answer the question, but what I was curious about was the following. The fires, they pose a threat to the mining site and the mining workers who are on the ground. I was just curious if you see the situation as a real threat to the mining site and the workers there.
Bill or Arj, I don't know if you got this, but if this becomes a threat for the mining, the workers.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, my translation is not working here, but in regards to if this is regarding lodged from the beginning, we were making sure that the appropriate resources were there, and just like any other community, We monitor the situation extremely closely to making sure that any resources there, any evacuation that needs to be done, work very closely with them to making sure that personnel are well protected, and also the property is going to be protected. So there is no difference when it comes to whether it's a mine or a community, and something that we're monitoring very closely up in the north.
Est-ce que ça va pour la réponse?
Oui, est-ce que, you know, if the wildfires get closer to the mine and if it represents a threat at some point, is a specific contingency plan, you know, going to be elaborate, or what help is the government maybe ready to allocate?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, actually, just as I stated, when it comes to the mining, we have been monitoring the very situations in the one particular mine up in the north, just like any other community. First of all, it's the response is managed by the territories themselves. If they need federal resources, they're made available very quickly, and we're ready to step up. And just to kind of elaborate on how the response is also done. What we try to do is don't wait for the actual emergency to pop up and then try to move in resources. There's very good situational awareness that takes place on a daily basis, and especially when you have such crises happening all across the country. You have all the provinces emergency operations center working very closely with the government operations center, including that includes the mining sites as well. And what we try to do is look at weather patterns, look at any other contingencies, and put plans in place early on and have resources ready to go. So if the situation needed it, that the contingency plan can be executed very, very, very quickly here. And so, yes, if resources are needed, absolutely, the federal resources will be made available just like any other community.
Thank you. Next, we have Rafi Bouchakanian, CBC. Go ahead, please.
Thanks very much. This is for Minister Sajjan. I just wanted to check in on this. We heard from Liz May this morning at a news conference that you have expressed openness to a permanent firefighting force as well as federally purchased water bombers in exchanges with her. Can you tell us where you are at on this, on either of both of these two? Thanks.
Sorry, I was on mute. I had a very good discussion with Elizabeth about this. And as I offered up to her is that we need to look at what the response needs to be when it comes to additional equipment, what type of system is going to be required. Also, we talked, one of the things we need to talk about is mitigation and adaptation is something that's going to be very important to her and all Canadians. And when it comes to the response that we need to have, I want to also comment on the work that Minister Blair has done previously in this portfolio that we will be continuing. And the key thing is that we have for the provinces. And this is one of the reasons why we have identified and funded 1,000 new firefighters. And most recently, the announcement that Minister Wilkinson had just made. And so we'll continue to work on this. We are looking at the equipment. When it comes to additional equipment, especially when it comes to aircraft, it is a little bit more complicated because you have to get in line for the various companies who are building the equipment. And what we also need to do is look at where are the resources best suited? Are they best suited at the federal level, or are they best the provincial and territories? And this is the work that we will continue to do now as we move forward in terms of response. But we'll also, and I look forward to continue that conversation with Elizabeth on this.
Okay. Thank you very much. As a follow-up question for whichever minister can take this, I understand that people have had to pay to evacuate on commercial flights. Will you be reimbursing them for this? And if not, why not?
Rafi, I'll just jump in here. There are obviously people have certain responsibilities with respect to traveling and gassing up their car in order to leave by highway. Certainly, one of the things that we've undertaken to do is that no one will be left behind. And so, if for whatever reason a person is unable to evacuate either by road or by commercial flight, we'll make sure that we accommodate them and we provide them with the support that they need and help them get to a position of safety. With respect to other types of financial supports, that is primarily the responsibility of the territory to design and implement supports. There are a number of different federal programs, for example, the Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangement that they can access. We'll be working very closely with the Northwest Territories. Right now, our focus is on getting people to safety, but we will also work with the territory and work with the residents who've been impacted on this to make sure that the supports that they may need are available. The Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangement does provide a number of eligible expenses with respect to evacuation efforts, and so we'll be working very closely with the territory in order to accommodate and to work through that, and that information will be forthcoming as quickly as we're able to do so. But right now, the focus is on getting people to safety.
Sorry, because I couldn't hear, and if I may add to that, I just said before the second, I heard about problems that could be with prices. I called the CEO of Canada and assured that all prices would be economic. And again, as Minister Blair said, for us, a priority for now definitely is getting people out by air, by road, and absolutely no one will be left behind.
Thank you, merci. Maintenant, Anne-Caroline Desplanques, Le Journal de Montréal.
Caroline Desplanques from Journal de Montréal.
Oui, bonjour, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Question. My question has to do with Meta blocking news when it comes to the wildfires. Residents are complaining about not having access to critical information as they are evacuating. So I'd like to know if there is a legal provision or a regulation that will allow the government to pressure Facebook in this context. Is there a mechanism that will allow the government to pressure Meta?
Ce que Meta fait actuellement est complètement inacceptable.
Interpretation will not be provided for the current speaker because an appropriate microphone is not being used. Interpretation will resume as soon as an appropriate microphone is used.
On voit qu'à travers ce blocage-là, les gens n'ont pas accès à de l'information qui est absolument cruciale. Alors, je demande à Meta de renverser cette décision, de permettre aux gens d'avoir accès aux nouvelles. Et je sais que ma collègue Pascal regarde cette situation et discute avec Meta.
Oui, je comprends bien, Monsieur Rodriguez, mais c'est une question que j'ai aussi posée à votre
and I asked the same question to Ms. Saint-Onge as well. And
Minister Sajan, maybe you have an idea of is there any rules, any law that could help with this right now, like in the immediacy?
I know we're talking about
It's the blocking of the news by Facebook.
Sure that people. Sorry, my internet connection is not very good right now.
And can I just then add that the CBC also provides in the territory a low frequency newscast that I would encourage people that aren't able to get this absolutely vital information currently through Meta that they tune in to that CBC broadcast, and that information that they do need will be made available through that.
Okay, I think we're done with that question. I would like to turn now to Eric Bowling, N.W.T. News.
Good morning. Just want to verify that my mic is working and you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So my question is in regards to the minister broke up a little bit when he was talking about this, but I think I got the gist of it. In regards to price gouging and how it will not be tolerated, I'm just wondering if I could get an explanation of how that would look. How's that going to be enforced if somebody sees or suspects something one of price gouging? What are the mechanisms they can use to report it? Thank you.
So the second, I hope you can hear me well. The second that I heard about this yesterday, I took the phone and called Mr. Russo, the CEO of Air Canada, that explained to me that there was a glitch, there was a mistake, things were corrected right away, and that all the fares were at the economic level, that price were totally capped, and my department, transport, is monitoring the situation at all moments, live, all the time.
Okay, that's good. I'm just curious what sort of penalties or would be enacted on someone who violates this.
For now, we're assured and reassured that the situation is not happening. But if it had to happen, again, there is zero tolerance from the government. And then I would look at all the options that we have. All of them.
Thank you. I'd like to turn now to Jim Morse, the Associated Press.
Thank you very much. I don't know if any of the ministers can answer this question right now, but do we know right now how many people have been evacuated from Yellowknife? I know the evacuation order was supposed to be by noon today. Do we know if this number has been reached? Are we near that number?
I did receive a briefing today from the Government Operations Center. The evacuation continues, and we don't have the exact numbers just yet. And the reason being is that things is so fluid, and we want to move as quickly as possible. But when we have more accurate numbers, we will be able to share it with you. But we don't have the exact numbers at this time.
Thank you. And maybe for Minister Rodriguez, you had spoken when you were talking about additional aircraft being added today, and you were breaking up at that time. Could you explain again? I would imagine the additional aircraft is beyond what the commercial airlines are offering.
We've asked, of course, this is coordinated from the ground, but we've asked support from all the commercial airlines that are operating there. So Air Canada added more flights, WestJet, Canadian North. We have Air North also helping Summit, North Caribou, of course, the armed forces. And we will make sure that we provide as many planes as we can, working with those airline companies.
And just to add to that, we are also contracting at the federal level additional aircraft to supplement what the military also has.
Thank you. Maintenant, Annie Guillemette, Cogeco.
Annie Guillemette, Cogeco Noël.
Bonjour, vous m'entendez bien?
Hi, can you hear me? I do understand that you don't have numbers in terms of the people who have already been evacuated, but do you have an assessment as to when the evacuation operation will be complete? Because fires are also expected in the upcoming hours in Yellowknife.
Don't have precise numbers, but she's asking, when do we expect to have evacuated everyone?
We'll have
André la réponse en français.
If I can also have the answer in French, please.
Which I can't get the translation here, but we will get numbers very shortly. We're getting updated regularly, but every 2 days, because we're trying to put as many aircraft and get the road movement as efficient as possible. We're focused on that. Once we do have the numbers, we will be able to provide them. One thing I can say is that the evacuation is actually going extremely well. It's been very orderly. They haven't reported, RCMP has not reported any type of hiccups that have come from the evacuation, and we'll have a much better idea by the end of today, hopefully, with the numbers and also the time that it will take. And I also just want to stress, as we're doing the evacuation, we're also making sure that the resources are also flowing into the Northwest Territories so that the essential services that are actually needed in the territories, that we're able to provide fuel supply and food as well.
Mon collègue mentionne qu'on devrait avoir des chiffres plus précis aujourd'hui en fin de journée, également de savoir le moment auquel tout le monde aura été évacué, parce que tout se passe en temps réel. On ajoute des avions, on fait sortir les gens dès que possible par la voie des airs, par transport terrestre. Il est en contact permanent avec le terrain. Jusqu'à maintenant, les forces de l'ordre nous disent que tout se passe dans l'ordre, qu'il n'y a eu aucun incident.
Puis, en suivi, M. Rodriguez, est-ce que...
To follow up, Mr. Rodriguez, do you think that you'll be able to help everyone who is in need before the fires arrive?
Je vais passer la parole à mon collègue, mais elle est profondément convaincue. Arj, do we believe that we'll be able to get everybody out before the fires get there?
So actually, I also want to stress the evacuation order that was put into place. The genesis behind that originally was that we were watching the fire and the weather pattern extremely closely. Initially, the territorial government felt that it was not needed, but they wanted to be prudent because as the winds potentially could have shifted, it would have blocked the highway. But the main emphasis is, as we evacuate, is to making sure that there's enough resources in place so that the fire actually does not reach Yellowknife. And if it does, there's enough resources to prevent it from actually going into the city itself. So I want to stress, even though we're doing the evacuation, the priority is to making sure that Yellowknife and all its property are safe. And as of right now, nothing has changed that analysis, and we're confident that things can be protected. But as we know, and have seen across the country, that things can change very rapidly, and that's why a very prudent decision, which I agree with the territorial government, a decision was made to evacuate as many people as possible through the roads beforehand, and then using the airport as the last measure. But right now, the priority is to making sure that Yellowknife is safe, and all the resources currently are in place, and we'll push more resources to making sure that that is accomplished.
La décision a été prise avec les autorités locales de prendre aucun risque, et même si dans certains cas, c'est des mesures préventives, de sortir tout le monde le plus rapidement possible, tout en permettant d'avoir les mesures et les moyens nécessaires pour combattre ces feux-là, pour préserver l'intégrité de la ville.
Merci. I have 3 people indicating they have questions. Turn to Bill Graveland, Canadian Press.
Hi there, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, terrific. I'm not sure who to direct this to, but I'm curious about the $13 million flowing to the Northwest Territories government regarding more equipment, more firefighters. Is this going to have any impact now, or is this, are we talking about next year country now?
Thank you. I can answer that. And so the money has actually begun to flow, and so it can have an impact now. And as far as going forward, there are conversations about what more might be needed to assist. But this agreement was actually signed a few months ago.
Okay. And second question, I know it's slightly geographically different, but Minister Sajjan, I was wondering if you had any comment about the situation in Kelowna.
The situation, I can tell you, in Kelowna is very concerning. Last night, even I was getting pictures and videos sent by close friends of mine. And our Government Operations Center contacted the BC Operations Center to get an update. And one thing that the message that we got back is that their best crews are actually on this fire. But the winds were very concerning, and we didn't know where things were going. And as we know that now, some of the fire has shifted. So we'll get a better update. But one thing I can assure you is that we have offered up full federal support in support of this fire. And I encourage all the residents to listen to the guidance of the local authorities to making sure that they are safe, and we will do everything to making sure that the property is protected. And I also just want to mention, even just before this, I was actually just in Kamloops and then in Soyuz, and we had a similar situation there at that time. Even before, as I was briefed by the fire department in Soyuz, even before the fire department was notified, resources were pushed in. And the reason I want to emphasize this is that the system is extremely seamless. Resources are pushed down before they're even asked. And because of this, they were able to protect the neighborhood. In one place, the neighborhood, in one house, the fire was literally 1 meter away. And the fire department told me that if one house had gone up, they could have potentially lost the entire neighborhood there. And so it just goes to show how well the system works. But at the same time, it's because of year after year, we've had this experience. It's sad that we have to do so. So it's one of the discussions that we need to have in the future, and the work that Mr. Blair has started, that we need to work on prevention, we need to work on adaptation, and we need to make sure that the right resources are even enhanced when it comes to response as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Dan Spector, Global News.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Minister Rodriguez, you talked about it in French, but I was wondering if you could just talk a bit more also about those conversations that are going on with Meta because of all the people who are affected by these wildfires, who are not able to see news about how to get out or about how they're evolving because of what Meta is doing right now.
Well, what I said is that what Meta is doing totally unacceptable. And I warned them during the conversations in the past of the risk of blocking news. We've seen what happened in Australia. I told them this could happen here. They said that it would be different. It is not different. So I'm asking them to go back on their decision and allow people to have access to news and information in Canada.
And Minister Blair, are more military troops being prepped to go and assist in these operations? What kind of expansion of military operation do you anticipate? How many troops could be devoted to these fires?
Yeah, thanks. We're prepared to send whatever resources are required. There was reconnaissance that was done by our officials. As I said, we've worked very closely with the territory to determine what was needed and where they were needed, and the certain skill sets that were required and equipment requirements. That has been determined, and so far we've, as I've said, we've deployed about 150 members from Valcartier. We've also sent in aviators, and of course the Rangers are also very present. They're from that community. I think the Rangers, I want to acknowledge, they do extraordinary work for us in the north. They're out there helping the people at evacuation centers, registering at the airport. They're also helping along that highway to make sure that there are support services, tow trucks, fuel depots. It's a long drive south from Yellowknife to those communities, and the Canadian Armed Forces are there. We're prepared to scale up if required, but right now we believe that there's adequate resources to do the tasks that have been assigned. And some of those firefighters are level 3 trained firefighters, but they've also been doing important work in working with local officials to build a fire break to protect the western regions of that city as the fire advances. And as Harj has said, there's some extraordinary work being done to protect that community. And although out of an abundance of caution and prudence, we're moving people to evacuation, we're also doing everything possible to ensure that we protect the community, critical infrastructure, people's homes, livelihoods, the city of Yellowknife.
Thank you. From what I see in the list, 2 last questioners. Stuart Benson from Hill Times and Richard Raycraft from CBC. Let's start with Stuart Benson, Hill Times. Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you. I think this is probably for Minister Sajjan, but anyone can jump in for this. But are there any sort of contingency plans that are in place now in the worst case scenario that this fire does reach Yellowknife and the evacuees may not be able to return anytime soon. Has that been planned out for? Is that something that there are resources in place to handle as of right now?
And in fact, actually, contingency planning is something that we do quite regularly and work on the worst case scenarios. And this is one of the reasons why Northwest Territory made the decision to give the evacuation order. But we are looking at many different contingencies. But what I also will say is that when it comes to contingency planning, it does take a lot of effort. This is why the Canadian Armed Forces personnel has sent additional planners to them to help plan out those contingencies, also work on logistics. And we've also even had Coast Guard personnel have also sent in people to start looking at the various plannings. So this contingency planning happens on a regular basis on worst case scenarios. And we have worked out many different scenarios. And also this takes into account a lot of the weather patterns that take place. Daily, there's briefings on the weather, shift in wind. And so it's based on some very good work that provided from NRCan and it takes into account how these contingency plans are put into place.
And just on a follow-up relating to the national force, would this be, because we do rely very heavily on our armed forces for these sort of coordination, as you said. Is that something that could be considered, that even if it's not a national force, it could be something more integrated into the armed forces, so that even if we are still relying on them, that it would be more of a dedicated a force on that level?
So this is something that we are looking at right now, is what type of response is needed. And as we look at it, rather than looking at what type of force is needed to kind of work backwards, what we need to do is look at what type of emergency have we been dealing with. It is sad to see that in Canada, because of climate change, we've been dealing with a lot of emergencies. If you look from 2015 on, the Canadian Armed Forces have been deployed far more in the last number of years than they have in the last 30 years. And this is something we need to take into account. We also need to be mindful that the Canadian Armed Forces also have other very important duties that need to be done not all over the world. So as they are looked at as a force, when we will look at what type of resources are going to be needed at the federal level, but more importantly, how do we also bolster support at the provincial level. So nothing is off the table, but the analysis that we need to do and what type of structure is going to be needed is going to be based on the analysis on the different emergencies that we've been having to deal with in the last 10 years and beyond. And then we'll also take a look at where things can actually go. Then we'll build out from that what will actually be needed. And then we'll also look at what type of additional tools, whether it's Canadian Armed Forces or other agencies, will be needed, which will include more training, more equipment, and even potential other type of federal forces.
Thank you. Next, we have Richard Raycraft, CBC.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Minister Sajjan, you mentioned that you're contracting at the federal level more aircraft to supplement what the military has. What did you mean by that? Can you provide more details?
What we try to do is, because Canadian Armed Forces, we have that ability for transport air, but we also try to do is contract aircraft, private aircraft, to be able to do this, whether it's going to be helicopters or larger transport aircraft. So that's what our teams are working on now, is contracting civilian aircraft that can go in and help with the evacuation, which will supplement what the Canadian Armed Forces have.
And Minister Blair, both you and Minister Sajjan mentioned that the military has been called in many times to respond to natural disasters lately. Given that we're leaning on the military for disaster response to an unprecedented degree, should the Canadian Armed Forces get more resources, including more funding from the government, to be able to do this type of work?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Rich. It's an important part of the Canadian government's commitment to regenerate our forces, to make sure that they are right-sized and that they are equipped and resourced to do the important jobs that we call upon them. And as Mr. Sajjan acknowledged, we've had to call upon the Canadian Armed Forces, and they've been extraordinary. They've answered the call in every case, and they've provided service. They've saved lives in this country. One of their responsibilities is to provide domestic response, but we know as the world becomes becomes an increasingly dangerous place, we need to invest significantly in the Canadian Armed Forces to make sure that they have the people, the resources, and the capacity that they need to do all of the jobs that Canadians rely upon them to do. And so that's a commitment that our government has made. We're making significant new investments in the Canadian Armed Forces to ensure that they are able to provide the supports and services and be there for Canadians when we need them.
We've been listening in there live to a number of federal ministers, including the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, the Minister of National Defense, and also the Transport Minister, giving an update there on the situation, the wildfire situation in the Northwest Territories. Of course, we know that we are nearing that deadline of noon local time. Of course, that's coming up in less than an hour now for everyone to get out of the Territory's capital city, Yellowknife. The CBC's Kate McKenna was also listening to that. She joins us now from Ottawa with some more details of what we just learned there from some of those ministers. So Kate, if you can here, give us a bit of an update on what we heard in terms of those air evacuations trying to get people out of Yellowknife.
Yeah, so those federal ministers were sort of giving an overview of some of the things we've already heard and a few new things. So I just want to take people through what's happening with those air evacuations. People can still leave by road, and according to numbers that came from the Territory, more than 1,000 cars left yesterday. But today there are more than 20 commercial flights leaving Yellowknife. That is an increase of what is normal there, perhaps obviously. The Transport Minister said that different airlines have stepped up and they've added more flights to get as many people out of there as possible, talking about a total of 2,000 people leaving by air today. And that also includes military evacuation flights. So we did get a few new details on the military evacuation flights. The first one left yesterday. It included 79 people who are in long-term care. They left on a Hercules, which is a turboprop plane that's typically used in Canada for search and rescue. A handful of aircraft have been deployed to help with this. So we're talking about Hercules aircraft. We're also talking about the Globemaster, which is one of Canada's largest planes in our military fleet. It's typically used to do things like move tanks from Ukraine. So we're talking about basically the big guns, the biggest possible planes that we can to get as many people out of there as possible. As well, they've also employed another plane that's typically used in a sort of passenger capacity. So those planes will be flying in and out of the Territory today, taking people elsewhere to get them out of harm's way. We also wondered if those commercial flights would be reimbursed. So far, what we heard from the minister is that no, that's not set to happen, but there are programs that people can apply for when they're affected by wildfires, as they are in this situation.
And those Globemasters, of course, Kate, those were sort of the sort of aircraft that we saw when there was that, of course, the evacuation, getting people out of Kabul, Afghanistan, just to sort of give everyone an idea here of what it is that we're talking about. Also hoping, though, that you can bring us up to speed on some of the other things that we heard there in terms of federal involvement trying to help people who were in the Northwest Territories.
Yes, we also heard more about what the military is doing on the ground there. So military members were deployed last weekend when the Territory asked for help from the federal government. At that point, about 150 military members from Valcartier, CFB Valcartier, were sent to help with firefighting efforts. They're also doing things like working on a fire break to stop the fire from spreading, or try to stop the fire from spreading. They're also involved in the operations and logistics of moving people around. We heard that rangers in the Northwest Territories are helping people leave by road. We also heard, I think possibly for the first time, that people who are applying for employment insurance, people who aren't able to work because of this, displacement, their application will be fast-tracked. They can apply through Service Canada to hopefully get whatever they need, get some financial help because they can't work. So that was an announcement that was made today as well. The RCMP are patrolling neighborhoods in Yellowknife, but of course the focus today is getting as many people out of there as possible. It's not clear, based on what we just heard, how many people have left. As you mentioned, that deadline's in less than an hour, but the federal government says they'll keep adding flights if they have to. They even said they'll charter more flights if they have to get people out safely while it's still possible.
About 45 minutes now left to go before that noon local time deadline. Kate, thank you for all this. We appreciate the update. The CBC's Kate McKenna for us there in our Ottawa newsroom.
Well, that fast-developing wildfire emergency in British Columbia is forcing people from their homes in both Kelowna and West Kelowna. This video came to us overnight. People are being ordered to leave their homes in Kelowna's McKinley and Clifton Road North neighborhoods. That's near Okanagan Lake up to south of Acacia Lane. That evacuation order came early this morning after the big wildfire in West Kelowna appeared to have jumped the lake. More than 2,400 properties are also under an evacuation order, with another 4,800 under an evacuation alert. The state of emergency also covers part of the West Bank First Nation. We've got Albert Delatella tracking the latest for us on this fast-developing situation in the Okanagan in British Columbia. So, Albert, what are we hearing from people who are on the ground right now?
Well, Hillary, there's another new evacuation order to tell you about on top of the one I mentioned last hour. It's for all properties north of McKinley Road up to south of Acacia Lane, as you mentioned there. This follows another recent order for properties in the Shaler area of Kelowna. The lots added to the order are all surrounding Hidden Lake and Still Pond. You can see some recent visuals there from the area. The other evacuation orders we heard about early this morning. They're for people living in the Clifton Road North area and the McKinley neighborhood as well, north of downtown Kelowna. Meanwhile, the entire city of Kelowna is, and it's nearly 150,000 people, they're now under a state of emergency. What's behind all of this is the McDougall Creek wildfire, which has exploded in size since it was detected on Tuesday, about 10 kilometers northwest of West Kelowna. You can see it there on that map. That's on the western side of Lake Okanagan. And Kelowna is on the east side. The rapidly spreading wildfire has also prompted local states of emergency in the city of West Kelowna and part of the West Bank First Nation. In West Kelowna, more than 2,400 properties are under evacuation order, and about 4,800 are under evacuation alert. CBC News spoke to a number of people forced out of their homes in the region. They describe having to move fast to get out.
No cell phone chargers. The important things I left behind. So, but I got the cat. We ended up being one of the last to leave because we were warning people. I was running door to door. It was scary. It was like running for your life.
Definitely the worst that I've experienced since living here, and obviously the closest that we've ever been. This is the first time I've ever got evacuated outside my building, so it's very scary. We don't really know what's going on at all.
Interior Health posted on its website about the relocation of residents from the Brookhaven Care Center care home. It said, out of an abundance of caution, Interior Health has evacuated the site. 95 individuals in care are being moved to appropriate alternate facilities in the Kelowna and Summerland areas. Officials with Central Okanagan Emergency Operations, they're confirming structures have been lost in West Kelowna and also in areas in the regional district of Central Okanagan West. We did hear from the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Harjit Sajjan, earlier in that update. He said the federal government has offered full support in connection to all of this. He's asking residents to listen to officials.
And Albert, I do want to just bring in a bit of an update here for our viewers that we have just heard that the Kelowna airport is going to be closed indefinitely at this point. Of course, that's something that we're going to continue to monitor, hoping for some more information from airport officials, but just wanted to get that in, that the Kelowna airport is now closed indefinitely. That's our Albert Delatella there for us in our newsroom. Of course, he will be helping to keep us updated on this situation as it continues. Thank you, Albert.
You're welcome.